Picture this, a towering empire that once controlled a quarter of the world's land and population, an economic juggernaut that shaped global trade, finance, and industry for centuries, reduced to a nation where nurses use food banks, where energy bills bankrupt families, where the currency crashes overnight, and where the average worker is poorer today than they were 15 years ago. This isn't a dystopian prediction. This is modern Britain. The United Kingdom, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, the nation that gave the world railways, telecommunications, and modern capitalism itself, is now trapped in a slow-motion economic collapse that most people refuse to acknowledge. But here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say out loud. Britain's economy isn't just struggling. It's fundamentally broken. And the cracks you're seeing today, the inflation, the stagnant wages, the crumbling infrastructure, the exodus of talent, these aren't temporary problems. They're the inevitable consequences of 70 years of denial, delusion, and catastrophic strategic mistakes. This is the story of how an empire fell and convinced itself it was still standing. Now, before we go any further, if you're someone who questions the mainstream narrative, who wants to understand the real forces shaping our world, then you need to hit that subscribe button right now. Because this channel doesn't give you surface-level takes or recycled talking points. We go deep. We connect dots others ignore. And if you appreciate that kind of content, if you want more analysis that cuts through the noise, then like this video, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, and let's build a community of people who actually want to understand what's happening beneath the headlines. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll see Britain, and maybe your own country, in a completely different light. Let's start with the most obvious question. How did we get here? How does a nation that once ruled the waves end up with an economy weaker than Italy's, more fragile than Spain's, and more stagnant than Japan's? The answer begins in 1945. World War II didn't just end Britain's military dominance. It shattered the economic foundations of empire. The war cost Britain a quarter of its national wealth. Cities were bombed into rubble. Factories were outdated. The population was exhausted. And most importantly, Britain was drowning in debt, owing billions to the United States and Canada, forced to accept loans with humiliating conditions. But here's where the psychology gets interesting. Despite losing its empire piece by piece, India in 1947, Egypt in 1956, most of Africa by the 1960s, Britain never truly accepted its new role in the world. The political class, the media, the public, they all clung to the fantasy of greatness. They told themselves that Britain was still a global power, still exceptional, still destined to lead. This delusion had catastrophic consequences. Instead of reinventing itself like Germany or Japan, nations that rebuilt from total destruction into export powerhouses, Britain tried to maintain the appearance of empire without the economic engine to support it. They kept military bases around the world they couldn't afford. They maintained a nuclear arsenal that drained resources. They tried to play great power politics while their industrial base crumbled. And here's the kicker. While Britain was playing dress-up as a superpower, its competitors were building the future. Germany invested in advanced manufacturing. Japan revolutionized electronics and automobiles. South Korea turned itself from a war-torn backwater into a technological titan. Even France, despite its own post-colonial struggles, maintained a strong industrial policy and protected its strategic industries. But Britain chose finance. They decided that instead of making things, they'd make money from money. London would become the world's financial capital, and that would be enough. And for a while, it worked. The City of London became a glittering hub of global finance, attracting capital from every corner of the world. Bankers made fortunes. The property market in London exploded. Luxury brands thrived. But here's what nobody wanted to admit. This wealth was paper-thin. It was concentrated in one city, benefiting a tiny elite, while the rest of the country hollowed out. The factories closed. The mines shut down. The shipyards fell silent. Entire communities built around industry were left to rot. And the worst part? This wasn't an accident. It was policy. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher came to power with a radical vision. Break the unions, deregulate the economy, privatize state assets, and let the market decide. Now, whether you love Thatcher or hate her, one thing is undeniable. Her policies accelerated Britain's transformation from an industrial economy to a service-based economy. She crushed the coal miners, the steelworkers, the dockers, anyone who stood in the way of her free market revolution. And in their place, call centers, retail jobs, financial services, low-wage, precarious work that offered none of the stability or dignity of the industrial jobs that vanished. But Thatcher's supporters will tell you this was necessary. They'll say British industry was uncompetitive, that the unions were holding the country back, that creative destruction is how capitalism works. And maybe there's some truth to that. But here's what they won't tell you. Other countries didn't abandon their industries. Germany didn't. Japan didn't. They reformed, they invested, they adapted. Britain just gave up. And the consequences of that choice are everywhere today. Walk through the former industrial heartlands of Britain, the north of England, the Midlands, South Wales, central Scotland, and you'll see the scars. Towns with boarded-up shops. Young people fleeing to London because there are no opportunities. Life expectancy lower than the national average. Drug addiction, alcoholism, despair. These places didn't just lose jobs. They lost purpose. They lost identity. And the political establishment's response? Essentially, move to London or retrain as a barista. No investment. No industrial strategy. No attempt to rebuild what was destroyed. Just a shrug and a lecture about the inevitability of globalization. And here's where it gets even darker. Because while Britain was deindustrializing, it was also bleeding talent. The best and brightest. The engineers, the scientists, the entrepreneurs. They looked around and saw a country with no industrial base, no tech sector worth mentioning, and no vision for the future. So they left. They went to America, to Germany, to Asia, anywhere that offered opportunity. Britain suffered a brain drain that continues to this day. And what did the government do? They relied more and more on immigration to fill the gaps, which created its own political tensions, which we'll get to. But let's talk about the financial sector for a moment, because this is where Britain placed all its bets. London became the playground of global capital. Russian oligarchs, Middle Eastern oil money, Chinese billionaires, they all parked their wealth in London real estate, driving up prices and turning housing into an investment asset rather than a place to live. The financial sector grew fat on speculation, derivatives, and increasingly complex financial instruments that even the people selling them didn't fully understand. And then came 2008. The global financial crisis should have been Britain's wake-up call. Northern Rock collapsed. RBS had to be nationalized. The government was forced to bail out the banks with hundreds of billions of pounds of taxpayer money. Suddenly, the illusion shattered. The financial sector, the golden goose, had laid a rotten egg. And Britain was left holding the bill. But instead of using the crisis as an opportunity to rebalance the economy, to invest in industry, infrastructure, and innovation, Britain doubled down on austerity. The conservative-led government that came to power in 2010 slashed public spending, gutted local services, froze wages for public sector workers, and told the country that there was no alternative. We had to tighten our belts. We had to live within our means. Except that's not how economics works. When you cut spending during a downturn, you shrink the economy further. You reduce demand. You kill growth. And that's exactly what happened. Britain endured the slowest recovery from a recession in modern history. Productivity flatlined. Wages stagnated. Inequality soared. The richest got richer while everyone else got poorer. And the infrastructure, roads, railways, schools, hospitals, crumbled from lack of investment. Meanwhile, other countries were investing. Germany was building renewable energy infrastructure. China was constructing high-speed rail networks. America, despite its own problems, was pouring money into tech innovation. But Britain was obsessed with balancing the books, as if the national economy was a household budget. It was economic malpractice disguised as responsibility. And then came Brexit. Oh, Brexit. The decision that will define Britain for generations. In 2016, Britain voted to leave the European Union, the world's largest single market, its biggest trading partner, and a political project that had helped keep peace in Europe for 70 years. The reasons people voted for Brexit are complex. Some genuinely believed in sovereignty, others were furious about immigration, Many were just angry at decades of being ignored by Westminster. But the economic consequences were entirely predictable. Leaving the EU meant leaving the single market and customs union, which meant friction in trade, regulatory divergence, and a massive hit to business confidence. Companies started moving operations to the continent. Investment dried up. The pound collapsed. Inflation surged. And the government's response? A combination of denial, incompetence, and magical thinking. They promised that Brexit would unleash Britain's potential, that freed from Brussels bureaucracy, Britain would become a nimble, dynamic, buccaneering economy. None of that happened. Instead, Britain got more paperwork, more border delays, more costs, and less trade. Small businesses were buried under customs forms. Exporters lost access to their largest market. And the much-promised trade deals with countries like America and China? Either non-existent or underwhelming. Here's the thing about Brexit that nobody wants to say. It wasn't just an economic decision. It was the final, desperate act of a country that couldn't accept its diminished status. Brexit was Britain trying to reclaim a sovereignty it never actually lost, trying to return to a greatness that no longer existed. It was nostalgia weaponized into policy. And the people who sold it, the politicians, the tabloids, the think tanks, they knew it was a fantasy. But they sold it anyway because it gave them power. And now, Britain is paying the price. But let's be clear, Brexit didn't break the British economy. It exposed how broken it already was. All those structural weaknesses, deindustrialization, financial over-reliance, regional inequality, underinvestment, Brexit just made them impossible to ignore. And instead of facing reality, Britain's leaders keep doubling down on delusion. Take the recent mini-budget disaster under Liz Truss. In 2022, Britain's Prime Minister announced massive unfunded tax cuts, a return to trickle-down economics that even most conservatives had abandoned. The markets panicked. The pound plummeted to record lows against the dollar. Pension funds nearly collapsed. Mortgage rates exploded overnight. Families saw their monthly payments jump by hundreds of pounds. And Truss was forced to resign after just 49 days, outlasted by a lettuce in a publicity stunt. It was humiliating. But more than that, it was revealing. It showed that Britain's economy is now so fragile, so vulnerable, that even a hint of fiscal irresponsibility can trigger a crisis. The UK doesn't have the room to maneuver that larger, more productive economies have. It's living on borrowed time and borrowed money. And let's talk about that borrowed money. Britain's national debt is now over 100% of GDP and climbing. Interest payments on that debt are consuming an ever larger share of the government budget. Money that could be spent on schools, hospitals, infrastructure. But instead, it's going to bondholders. Britain is trapped in a debt spiral with no clear way out. Tax revenues are weak because growth is weak. Growth is weak because investment is weak. Investment is weak because businesses have no confidence in Britain's future. It's a vicious cycle. And every attempt to break it fails because the underlying problems, deindustrialization, low productivity, poor infrastructure, are never addressed. Instead, Britain lurches from crisis to crisis, each time patching things up just enough to survive, but never actually fixing anything. Now let's talk about productivity, because this is where Britain's dysfunction becomes impossible to deny. Productivity, output per hour worked, is the single most important driver of long-term prosperity. If productivity grows, wages can grow, living standards can rise, the economy can expand. But in Britain, productivity has been stagnant since 2008. In fact, British workers today are barely more productive than they were 15 years ago. That's unprecedented in modern economic history. And the reasons are obvious if you're willing to look. British workers aren't lazy. They're working with outdated equipment, in underinvested industries, with poor infrastructure. When your trains don't run on time, when your internet is slow, when your business can't get the machinery it needs because of supply chain issues and Brexit red tape, how are you supposed to be productive? Germany invests nearly twice as much as Britain in capital equipment per worker. That's why German workers are more productive. It's not culture. It's investment. But Britain doesn't invest. British companies sit on cash reserves rather than spending on innovation. The government underinvests in infrastructure compared to peer nations. And foreign investment, once reliable, is now fleeing because Britain looks like a risky bet. So productivity stays flat. Wages stay flat. Living standards stagnate or decline. And people get angry. Which brings us to the social consequences of all this. Because an economy isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's people's lives. And in Britain today, people are suffering. Child poverty is rising. Food bank usage has exploded. There are now more food banks than McDonald's franchises in Britain. That's not a developing country statistic. That's a rich, Western nation in the 21st century. Homelessness is soaring. The NHS, once the pride of Britain, is collapsing under the weight of underfunding and demand. Wait times for treatment are measured in months, sometimes years. People are dying waiting for surgery. And the social care system is in meltdown, with elderly people unable to get the support they need. But here's what makes it worse. This isn't equally distributed. London and the South East are doing relatively fine. Wealthy areas still have functioning services, good schools, economic opportunity. But the rest of the country, the North, the Midlands, Wales, Scotland, they're being left behind. Britain has some of the worst regional inequality in the developed world. If you're born in certain parts of Britain, your life expectancy is 10 years shorter than if you're born in wealthy areas. 10 years. That's the gap between a developed and a developing nation. And it's happening inside one country. This is what decades of neglect, underinvestment, and ideological rigidity produce. A divided nation where opportunity is determined by geography, where the postcode you're born into decides your fate. And the political response? Dysfunction and denial. British politics has become a circus. Since 2016, Britain has had 5 prime ministers, multiple snap elections, endless scandals, and a revolving door of incompetence. The political class is more interested in fighting culture wars and internal party battles than addressing the economic crisis. And the media amplifies the circus, distracting people with outrage and spectacle while the foundations crumble. Meanwhile, trust in institutions is collapsing. People don't believe politicians. They don't trust the media. They don't have faith that the system works for them. And they're right. The system doesn't work for them. It works for a small elite in London who benefit from the status quo. Everyone else is told to accept decline as inevitable. But let's zoom out for a moment and ask a bigger question. Could Britain have avoided this? Was there a different path? And the answer is yes. Absolutely yes. Look at countries that faced similar challenges. Germany was divided and occupied after World War II. It rebuilt through social partnership, industrial investment, and export-led growth. Japan was utterly destroyed, occupied, and humiliated. It rebuilt through strategic industrial policy, education investment, and innovation. South Korea was a dictatorship poorer than many African nations. It transformed through state-directed capitalism, heavy investment in education, and export promotion. These countries made choices. They chose to invest in their people and their industries. They chose long-term strategy over short-term profit. They chose national interest over ideological purity. Britain made different choices. It chose financialization over industry. It chose austerity over investment. It chose nostalgia over adaptation. And those choices have consequences. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room: immigration. Because Britain's economic dysfunction is deeply entangled with its immigration politics, and this is where things get really messy. For decades, Britain has relied on immigration to fill labor shortages, prop up the NHS, staff its service sector, and keep the economy limping along. Immigrants weren't just coming to Britain for opportunity. They were being actively recruited because British workers either couldn't or wouldn't do the jobs available. The NHS would collapse tomorrow without immigrant doctors and nurses. Agriculture depends on seasonal migrant workers. Construction, hospitality, logistics, all reliant on immigrant labor. But instead of being honest about this, politicians scapegoated immigrants. They blamed them for wage stagnation, for pressure on public services, for cultural change. And people believed it because it was easier than confronting the real problem: an economy that doesn't work for ordinary people. Brexit was sold partly on the promise of controlling immigration. Take back control wasn't just about sovereignty, it was about stopping foreigners from coming. And what happened after Brexit? Immigration didn't fall. In fact, it increased. Because the economy still needs workers. The only difference is now they're coming from different places, and there's more bureaucracy involved. But the underlying problem, that Britain's economy is dependent on low-wage labor to function, hasn't changed. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Britain needs immigrants more than immigrants need Britain. Skilled workers now have global options. If you're a talented engineer or doctor or entrepreneur, why choose Britain? Why deal with high taxes, poor infrastructure, political chaos, and a hostile immigration system when you could go to Canada, Australia, Germany, or the United States? Britain is losing the global talent competition, and that will have consequences for decades. Meanwhile, the people who bought the Brexit fantasy feel betrayed. They were told immigration would fall, wages would rise, public services would improve, and Britain would thrive. None of that happened. Immigration is still high. Wages are stagnant or falling in real terms. Public services are worse than ever. And Britain is poorer and more isolated. The betrayal is real. But the people who sold the lie face no consequences. They've moved on to the next grift, the next culture war, the next distraction. And the people left behind, the working-class communities who voted Brexit hoping for change, they're still waiting. Still ignored. Still angry. And that anger is dangerous. Because when people lose faith in the system, they become susceptible to extremism. Britain has seen a rise in far-right movements, conspiracy theories, and anti-establishment rage. Some of it is justified frustration. Some of it is manipulation by bad actors. But all of it is a symptom of economic failure. When people feel they have no future, when they see their communities crumbling, when they believe nobody in power cares about them, they look for someone to blame. And demagogues are happy to provide scapegoats. This is how democracies die. Not with tanks and coups, but with slow decay, with rising inequality, with collapsing trust, with people giving up on the system and turning to authoritarians who promise simple solutions to complex problems. Now let's talk about energy, because this is another layer of Britain's economic disaster. Britain used to be energy self-sufficient. North Sea oil and gas made Britain wealthy in the 1980s and 90s. But those resources are depleting. Production has been falling for years. And Britain failed to invest in alternatives. Renewable energy infrastructure is decades behind where it should be. Nuclear power plants are aging and weren't replaced in time. And the result? Britain is now vulnerable to global energy shocks. When Russia invaded Ukraine and gas prices spiked, British households saw their energy bills double or triple. People had to choose between heating and eating. Businesses closed because they couldn't afford energy costs. And the government's response was a temporary subsidy that cost tens of billions of pounds but did nothing to address the structural problem. Other countries saw the writing on the wall and acted. Germany, despite its mistakes with Russian gas dependence, is now rapidly expanding renewables. France maintained its nuclear capacity. Norway invested oil wealth into a sovereign wealth fund worth over $1 trillion. Britain squandered its North Sea wealth. Instead of investing in the future, it used oil revenues to fund tax cuts and current spending. There's no sovereign wealth fund. No long-term energy strategy. Just short-term thinking and reactive policy. And now Britain is paying the price. Energy costs are crippling the economy, and there's no easy fix. Building new infrastructure takes years and requires investment Britain doesn't want to make. So the country is stuck, dependent on expensive imported energy, with no plan to change course. Then there's housing. Britain has a housing crisis that makes its other problems worse. Property prices, especially in London and the Southeast, have skyrocketed over the past 30 years. Young people can't afford to buy homes. Renting consumes half or more of people's income. Homelessness is rising. And the cause is simple: supply and demand. Britain doesn't build enough housing. Planning laws are restrictive. Developers focus on luxury properties. Social housing was sold off and never replaced. And successive governments have done nothing meaningful to fix it. Why? Because existing homeowners, who vote reliably, benefit from high property prices. Their homes are their wealth. Politicians don't want to anger them by crashing the market. So the crisis continues. Young people are locked out of homeownership. Families live in overcrowded, substandard conditions. And inequality deepens because wealth is tied to property, and property is out of reach for most. But here's the bigger issue. When housing is unaffordable, labor mobility suffers. Workers can't move to where jobs are because they can't afford to live there. Businesses can't attract talent because people can't afford housing. The economy stagnates because the housing market is broken. And fixing it would require political courage Britain's leaders don't have. So the crisis festers, another weight dragging down an already struggling economy. Let's talk about education, because this is where Britain's long-term decline becomes inevitable. A country's future depends on its human capital, the skills, knowledge, and creativity of its people. Britain once had world-class education. Its universities are still prestigious. But the school system, the foundation of education, is crumbling. Teachers are underpaid and overworked. Schools are underfunded. Class sizes are too large. Buildings are literally falling apart. Some schools have had to close because of unsafe concrete. And the curriculum is increasingly narrow, focused on testing rather than learning. Meanwhile, university has become a debt trap. Tuition fees were introduced and then tripled, leaving students with tens of thousands of pounds in debt. The promise was that higher education would lead to better jobs and higher wages. But for many, that hasn't materialized. They're working the same low-wage jobs they could have done without a degree, except now they're burdened with debt. Other countries invest in education as a public good. Germany has free university education. Finland's school system is world-renowned and well-funded. Singapore treats teachers as elite professionals and pays them accordingly. Britain treats education as another cost to be minimized. And the results are predictable. Social mobility is declining. Poor kids stay poor. The gap between elite private schools and struggling state schools is widening. And the next generation is less equipped to compete in a globalized economy than their parents were. This is how decline becomes permanent. When you stop investing in young people, when you saddle them with debt, when you fail to give them the skills they need, you're guaranteeing that the country will fall further behind. And that's exactly what's happening. Now let's talk about the currency, because the pound's decline is both a symptom and a cause of Britain's economic problems. The pound used to be the world's reserve currency. It was a symbol of British power. But that era is long gone. Since the 1990s, the pound has been on a long, slow decline against major currencies. Brexit accelerated that decline. The mini-budget disaster sent it into freefall. And while a weak currency can help exports, Britain doesn't have much to export anymore. It's not a manufacturing powerhouse. Its services are harder to sell internationally, especially after leaving the single market. So a weak pound just makes imports more expensive, driving up inflation, squeezing living standards, and making Britain poorer relative to the rest of the world. Currency reflects confidence. When the pound falls, it means global markets have less faith in Britain's economy. It means investors are pulling money out. It means Britain looks risky. And once that perception takes hold, it's hard to reverse. Britain needs foreign investment to fund its deficit. But if investors lose confidence, they demand higher returns, which means higher interest rates, which means more debt servicing costs, which means less money for everything else. It's another vicious cycle, and Britain is trapped in it. Let's talk about trade, because post-Brexit Britain was supposed to become global Britain, forging new trade deals and thriving outside the EU. That hasn't happened. Britain has signed some trade deals, but most are rollovers of deals it already had as an EU member, and many are worse. The much-hyped deal with Australia? It benefits Australia far more than Britain. The deal with New Zealand? Economically insignificant. The comprehensive deal with America? Doesn't exist and won't exist anytime soon because Britain has little leverage. Meanwhile, trade with the EU, still Britain's largest trading partner, is hampered by the new barriers Brexit created. Exports are down. Supply chains are disrupted. and businesses are frustrated. The problem is simple. Britain is a medium-sized economy trying to negotiate with giants. The EU is a bloc of 450 million people. America is the world's largest economy. China is the world's factory. India is a rising power with over 1 billion people. Britain, by itself, doesn't have the leverage to get favorable deals. It's a price taker, not a price maker. And the world has moved on. Global trade is increasingly organized around regional blocs. The EU, USMCA, RCEP. Britain is outside all of them, trying to go it alone in an era when that strategy doesn't work. It's economic self-harm dressed up as sovereignty. And here's the cruel irony. Brexit was sold as reclaiming control. But Britain now has less control than ever. It can't influence EU regulations, but it still has to follow them if it wants to trade with Europe. It can't shape global trade rules because it's not part of the major blocs. It's isolated, weakened, and nostalgic for a power it no longer has. The world didn't wait for Britain. It moved on. And Britain is being left behind. Now let's talk about innovation and technology, because this is where Britain's failure is most stark. The 21st century economy is built on technology. Software, AI, biotech, clean energy, semiconductors. The countries that lead in these fields will dominate the future. Britain should be competitive. It has world-class universities. It has a history of scientific achievement. It invented the computer, the World Wide Web, and countless other technologies. But it can't commercialize innovation. British researchers make breakthroughs, then watch as American or Asian companies turn them into products. Why? Because Britain doesn't have the investment ecosystem. Venture capital is weak. Government support for R&D is inconsistent. The regulatory environment is sluggish. And the best talent leaves for Silicon Valley or Shenzhen. Look at the numbers. Britain spends less on R&D as a percentage of GDP than the US, Germany, Japan, or South Korea. Its tech sector, while growing, is dwarfed by America's and increasingly by China's. And the government's response has been half-hearted gestures. Tax breaks here, a grant program there, but nothing like the strategic industrial policy that drives innovation in other countries. Meanwhile, other nations are making massive bets. America's CHIPS Act is pouring hundreds of billions into semiconductor manufacturing. The EU's Green Deal is funding a transition to renewable energy. China's Made in China 2025 plan is targeting dominance in advanced manufacturing. Britain is cutting research funding and hoping the private sector will magically fill the gap. It won't. Let's talk about infrastructure, because nothing illustrates Britain's decline more clearly than its crumbling infrastructure. Travel on a British train, and you'll experience delays, cancellations, overcrowding, and fares that are among the highest in Europe. Roads are potholed and congested. Broadband speeds lag behind other developed nations. Airports are chaotic. And major infrastructure projects are plagued by delays and cost overruns. The most notorious example is HS2, the high-speed rail project that was supposed to connect London, Birmingham, Manchester, and Leeds. It was meant to boost regional economies, relieve pressure on overcrowded lines, and demonstrate Britain's infrastructure ambitions. Instead, it became a symbol of dysfunction. Costs ballooned from £37 billion to over £100 billion. The northern sections were cancelled. The project is years behind schedule. And what's being delivered is a fraction of what was promised. Compare this to other countries. China built 40,000 kilometers of high-speed rail in less than 2 decades. Spain has more high-speed rail than any European country except China globally. Even Morocco has better high-speed rail than Britain. This isn't just embarrassing. It's economically crippling. Poor infrastructure raises costs for businesses, wastes workers' time, and limits economic growth. When your trains don't work, people can't get to jobs. When your broadband is slow, businesses can't compete globally. When your roads are congested, goods can't move efficiently. Infrastructure is the foundation of a modern economy. And Britain's foundation is rotting. Why? Because infrastructure requires long-term investment, and Britain's political system is incapable of long-term thinking. Governments change every few years. Each one cancels or alters the previous government's plans. Private companies, brought in through privatization, prioritize profits over investment. And the planning system is so sclerotic that even when projects are approved, they take decades to complete. Other countries have state capacity, the ability to plan, fund, and execute major projects. Britain has lost that capacity. It outsources everything, layers on bureaucracy, and then wonders why nothing gets done. Let's talk about the social contract, because Britain's is broken. The post-war consensus was simple. Work hard, play by the rules, and you'll have a decent life. A job that pays enough to live on. A home you can afford. Health care when you need it. A pension in old age. That contract is dead. Today, you can work full-time and still need benefits to survive. You can save for years and still never afford a home. You can pay taxes your whole life and wait months for medical treatment. And your pension, if you even get one, will barely cover the basics. The system has failed. And people know it. They see politicians and billionaires getting richer while they struggle. They see bankers bailed out while they face austerity. They see a rigged game where the rules don't apply equally. This isn't sustainable. When people feel the system is unfair, they lose faith in it. They stop participating. They stop voting, or they vote for extremists. They stop following rules because the rules don't protect them. And social cohesion collapses. Britain is approaching that point. Strikes are surging as workers demand fair pay. Protests are increasing. Crime is rising because police are underfunded. Communities are fracturing along class, regional, and ethnic lines. The center is not holding. And the political establishment's response is to ignore it, to gaslight people into thinking things are fine, or to blame external enemies and immigrants. It's not working. People aren't stupid. They can see the decline with their own eyes. Now let's talk about climate change, because Britain's economic dysfunction makes it uniquely vulnerable. Britain is an island. Rising sea levels threaten coastal communities. Extreme weather, floods, heat waves, storms, is becoming more common. And the infrastructure to cope with this isn't being built. Flood defenses are inadequate. The housing stock isn't prepared for extreme heat. The energy grid isn't resilient enough for increasing demand and extreme conditions. Meanwhile, the transition to a green economy, a huge opportunity for jobs and growth, is being bungled. Britain was a leader in offshore wind, but investment has stalled. Electric vehicle infrastructure is patchy. Retrofitting homes for energy efficiency is barely happening. And the government keeps approving new oil and gas licenses, locking Britain into fossil fuel dependence. Other countries see the green transition as an economic opportunity. China dominates solar panels and batteries. America is subsidizing green manufacturing. The EU is setting strict standards and investing in green tech. Britain is dithering, stuck between climate commitments it won't fund and fossil fuel interests it won't confront. And the result will be another missed opportunity. Britain will end up importing green technology instead of making it, dependent on other countries for the energy transition just as it's dependent on them for everything else. And when the next energy crisis hits, or the next climate disaster, Britain will be unprepared and vulnerable. Again. Let's talk about the finance sector, because while Britain bet everything on it, even that is now under threat. London's status as a financial hub was built on several factors: English language, legal system, time zone, and access to the European market. Brexit undermined that last one. Financial firms have moved operations to Frankfurt, Paris, Amsterdam, and Dublin to maintain EU access. Thousands of jobs have left. Billions in assets have moved. And the city's dominance is eroding. Meanwhile, other financial centers are rising. New York remains the biggest. Hong Kong and Singapore are growing despite political risks. Shanghai is becoming a major player. London is still important, but it's no longer unrivaled. And Britain's dependence on finance makes it vulnerable. When the next financial crisis hits, and it will, Britain will suffer disproportionately. Moreover, finance doesn't create broadly shared prosperity. It enriches a small elite and drives up costs for everyone else. London is unaffordable because finance inflated property prices. Talented people go into finance instead of science, engineering, or teaching because that's where the money is. And the sector's political influence means regulations are weak and bailouts are guaranteed. Britain built its economy on a casino. And when the house loses, the public pays. Now let's talk about demographics, because this is a ticking time bomb for Britain's economy. Britain, like most developed nations, has an aging population. People are living longer, which is good, but birth rates are falling, which is economically challenging. An aging population means more retirees drawing pensions and using healthcare, and fewer working-age people generating the tax revenue to pay for it. This is a fiscal nightmare. The NHS is already overwhelmed partly because of an aging population. Social care is in crisis. Pensions are consuming an ever larger share of the budget. And the workforce is shrinking relative to the dependent population. Immigration has been propping this up, bringing in young workers who pay taxes and do jobs that need doing. But Brexit reduced immigration from Europe, and the political climate makes it harder to rely on immigration as a solution. Other countries are facing similar challenges, but they're responding with family-friendly policies, generous parental leave, affordable childcare, housing support, to encourage higher birth rates. Or they're actively recruiting immigrants and integrating them effectively. Britain does neither. It makes raising children expensive and difficult, so people have fewer kids. And it makes immigration politically toxic, so it can't rely on that either. The result is a demographic crisis with no solution in sight. And the economic consequences are dire. Slower growth, higher taxes, reduced public services, or all three. Britain's aging population is going to accelerate the economic decline unless something dramatic changes. And there's no sign that it will. Let's talk about the brain drain, because this is personal and devastating. Britain is losing its best and brightest. Young people with ambition and talent look at Britain: stagnant wages, unaffordable housing, poor public services, political chaos, and they leave. They go to America, Canada, Australia, Germany, anywhere that offers better opportunities. Doctors trained in Britain work in Australia. Engineers move to Germany or Silicon Valley. Academics take positions in American universities. And entrepreneurs start companies abroad. This isn't just anecdotal. Surveys show a significant portion of young Britons want to leave, and many are actively planning to. This is catastrophic for long-term growth. A country's most valuable resource is its people. When your talented, educated, driven people leave, you lose innovation, productivity, and future growth. You're left with an aging, less dynamic population and an economy that stagnates further. And the brain drain creates a vicious cycle. As talent leaves, the economy weakens. As the economy weakens, more talent leaves. And the country spirals downward. Reversing this requires making Britain attractive again. Good jobs, affordable living, quality public services, a hopeful future. None of that exists right now. And until it does, the exodus will continue. Let's talk about the global context, because Britain's decline isn't happening in isolation. The world is changing rapidly. China is rising. India is rising. Asia is the center of global economic growth. America, despite its problems, remains dominant and is reindustrializing. The EU, despite internal tensions, is still the world's largest single market. And Britain is a mid-sized, post-imperial nation with a broken economy and delusions of grandeur. It's trying to play great power politics with a weak hand. The special relationship with America is increasingly one-sided. America values Britain as a junior partner, but it's not a priority. The relationship with Europe is damaged, and rebuilding trust will take years. Relations with China are awkward, torn between economic interests and security concerns. And Britain has little influence in the rest of the world. The harsh reality is that Britain is no longer a major player on the global stage. It's a regional power at best, and a declining one. Its military, while still capable, is shrinking and underfunded. Its diplomatic influence is waning, and its economic weight is diminishing. In a multipolar world dominated by superpowers and regional blocs, Britain is increasingly irrelevant. And that irrelevance has economic consequences. Britain needs trade, investment, and cooperation to thrive. But if it's not important to other countries, they'll ignore it. They'll prioritize their own interests, and Britain will get whatever scraps are left. This is the end of empire, the final chapter. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. A slow, sad decline into mediocrity and irrelevance. And the tragedy is that it didn't have to be this way. Let's talk about what could have been. Imagine if, after World War II, Britain had been honest with itself. Honest about the end of empire. Honest about its new role in the world. Imagine if it had focused on rebuilding its industrial base instead of clinging to imperial pretensions. If it had invested in education, infrastructure, and innovation. If it had built a sovereign wealth fund with North Sea oil revenues. If it had maintained strong ties with Europe while also building relationships with the Commonwealth and the rest of the world. If it had created a social democracy that balanced market dynamism with social protection. If it had addressed regional inequality and invested in left-behind communities. If it had built affordable housing and world-class infrastructure. If it had made long-term strategic choices instead of short-term political calculations. That Britain could have thrived. It could have been a dynamic, prosperous, fair society. A model for how a former empire transitions to a new role with dignity and success. But that's not the Britain we have. We have a Britain that chose nostalgia over realism, finance over industry, austerity over investment, division over unity. And now it's paying the price. Part 7. So where does this leave Britain today? Stuck. Trapped in a low-growth, high-inequality, low-productivity doom loop with no clear way out. The challenges are immense. The political will to address them is absent. And the public is exhausted, angry, and losing hope. But here's the thing, it's not over. Decline is not inevitable. Countries can turn around. Ireland was a poor, backward economy in the 1980s. It's now one of the wealthiest in Europe. Poland emerged from communism and became a growth powerhouse. South Korea, Singapore, and others have transformed themselves within a generation. Britain could too. But it would require a complete rethinking of economic policy, political culture, and national identity. It would require admitting the past 70 years have been built on delusion. It would require painful trade-offs, higher taxes, more immigration, less nostalgia. It would require investing in the future even when the present is difficult. It would require political leaders willing to tell uncomfortable truths and make unpopular decisions. And most of all, it would require the British people to demand change and hold their leaders accountable. Right now, none of that seems likely. Britain is sleepwalking into decline, unwilling to confront reality, and hoping somehow things will get better on their own. They won't. But let's end on this. The story of Britain's decline is a warning. A warning to other nations that take their prosperity for granted. A warning about the dangers of nostalgia, of prioritizing finance over industry, of underinvesting in people and infrastructure, of allowing inequality to fester, of refusing to adapt to a changing world. Britain's mistakes are a case study in how not to manage an economy. And if other countries don't learn those lessons, they'll repeat them. America, with its crumbling infrastructure and political dysfunction, is showing some of the same symptoms. Parts of Europe face similar challenges. Even rising powers like China have structural vulnerabilities. No nation is immune to decline. Prosperity has to be earned and maintained, generation after generation. It requires investment, strategy, and hard choices. Britain stopped making those choices. And now it's paying the price. The UK economy isn't just struggling. It's broken. The end of empire didn't just mean the loss of colonies. It meant the loss of purpose, of direction, of a coherent economic model. And 70 years later, Britain still hasn't figured out what it wants to be. It's a nation trapped between a glorious past that's gone and a future it's too afraid to build. And until it confronts that reality, until it accepts what it is and what it needs to do, the decline will continue. The factories won't reopen. The wages won't rise. The infrastructure won't improve. The young won't stay. And the dream of global Britain will remain just that, a dream, disconnected from the harsh reality of a country that bet everything on the wrong things and lost. So what happens next? That depends on choices. Choices by leaders, by voters, by businesses, by communities. Britain can continue down this path: stagnation, decline, irrelevance. Or it can wake up, face reality, and start the hard work of rebuilding. Not rebuilding the empire, that's gone forever, but rebuilding an economy that works for its people. A society that invests in its future. A nation that accepts its place in the world and makes the most of it. That path is possible. But it requires courage Britain hasn't shown in decades. The clock is ticking. The world is moving on. And Britain is running out of time. The end of empire wasn't a moment. It's a process. And Britain is still living through it, still grappling with what it means, still trying to figure out who it is without the colonies, without the global dominance, without the illusion of exceptionalism. Maybe, eventually, it will find an answer. Maybe it will build something new, something better. Or maybe it will just fade, slowly and quietly, into history. Another great power that rose, dominated, and fell. The story is still being written. But right now, it doesn't look like a happy ending. This is the reality of Britain's broken economy. Not a temporary crisis. Not a political blip. But a structural, decades-long decline rooted in bad choices, delusion, and the inability to let go of the past. And until Britain confronts that truth, nothing will change. The question isn't whether Britain can reverse this decline. It's whether Britain even wants to. Because wanting it isn't enough. It requires sacrifice, honesty, and a willingness to build something different. And right now, Britain seems more interested in pretending everything is fine. It's not. And deep down, everyone knows it. So here's my question for you. Does your country risk making the same mistakes Britain made? Are you seeing the same warning signs: deindustrialization, rising inequality, crumbling infrastructure, political paralysis? Think about it. Because the forces that broke Britain's economy exist everywhere. And if we don't learn from Britain's failure, we're doomed to repeat it. If this video made you think, if it challenged what you thought you knew, then do me a favor. Share it. Let's start a conversation about what real economic decline looks like and how we stop it. Subscribe to this channel if you want more deep dives into the forces shaping our world. And drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and whether you see your own country heading down this path. Thanks for watching. This has been a hard story to tell, but it's one that needs to be told. The end of empire isn't just history, it's happening right now. And we're all living through the consequences. I'll see you in the next video. Stay curious, stay informed, and never stop questioning the world around you.